Hello and welcome to the first official Hacks to Knits episode of the 2021 season. I'm Deanna. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I did update you all a few weeks ago, so I had a quick little check-in. But let's be honest, that episode was a mess. I was a mess. I was still in my sling following my surgery. So I'm happy to be here with our regularly scheduled format. I am, as you can tell, out of my sling and starting to pick up more and more knitting, and I am glad you're here with me today. If you're new here, my name is Deanna and I'm an American living in Okinawa, Japan. I also happen to be a master knitter through the Knitting Guild Association. If that's a program you're not familiar with, I recommend going back in time into my archive. I think it was episode 2 that I did a full in-depth review of the Master Knitter program. Of course, I was just getting my feet wet into YouTube at this time, so forgive the lighting and the camera and whatnot. It's a work in progress. All right, guys, let's get started. I do, in fact, have a finished object for you. I'm so excited. Now that I'm out of the sling, the first thing I wanted to do was just pick up the knitting needles and get the old stuff off the needles, get some new stuff on the needles. So let me show you. Oh, please forgive me, the ends are not woven in, but this is the Night Shift by Andrea Mowry. And of course, all of this yarn is my own hand spun. Almost all of it is from Nest Fiber Club. It's all either wool or a wool silk blend. And guys, I just love this. I love how it turned out. The colors are great. This project, it did end up being a little bit larger than what the actual project dimensions call for. I actually wanted to make it a lot larger. I am a sucker for just a huge shawl, a blanket, a schlanket, whatever you want to call it, something that you can wrap around yourself 25 times. You know it's not going to fall off, you know it's going to stay where you put it, and it's going to be warm and snuggly. But I just lost my mojo. Part of it was pausing in the middle of this project and having surgery and then coming back to that row that has 700 stitches on it. So the mojo went away and I said, you know what, this is okay, it's big enough, it'll get the job done. I live in a tropical climate, so do I really need another giant wool shawl? No, I don't. So this thing is off the needles officially. I do have quite a bit of this yarn left over, so I'm contemplating actually weaving a panel. Originally I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do a side-by-side project where you do a knitted project, a crocheted project, a woven project, all using the same yarn, so you can appreciate how the different textures from those different techniques all come together to make different and unique finished objects that are still spectacular. But now I'm kind of thinking that I might find one edge of this thing, measure it, and actually weave an additional panel to attach onto this shawl, and then I can get that giant shawl I always wanted. But Haxton, you say, don't you already have a project on your loom? Well, no, I don't, not anymore. So longtime viewers of this channel, the last weaving project you saw go up onto my loom was an alpaca poncho. And it's funny because I'm not even a poncho person, but I saw this pattern and I was so excited about it, and I was really on this kick of trying to create more things with my weaving since I'm a beginner weaver. So I ordered this awesome yarn. In fact, I think I have some of it sitting right next to me. This is 100% alpaca from Gist Yarn, and I received 3 skeins of this. The other 2 are in a natural gray, like a silver gray, and then this beautiful blue skein. And this is what has come of it. So I knew right from the start that I was having problems, and since I am a new weaver, let me just share my problems with you, and then hopefully if you're a new weaver, you can learn from my mistakes, and if you're an experienced weaver, you can chime in down below and help all of us out here. But basically the problem is that alpaca is a little bit of a tricky fiber to weave with. If you're a knitter, imagine knitting with alpaca and then trying to rip it out, and how all the little hairs get all tangled together and clumped together, and you're constantly kind of fighting with it. That's what was happening with my weaving. I don't own a warping board, so day one I'm walking back and forth across my living room, connecting my loom to my warping peg, and the first disaster happened when the warping peg came unattached from where it was mounted and fell on the floor, and then the cat promptly jumped into the mess and huge tangles ensued. My husband was very kind. He stopped what he was doing and came over and very kindly helped me curse and scream and fuss for an hour and a half trying to get my loom successfully warped. The final result was that it was just really uneven. The tension was really bad. And as I was starting to weave, what was happening is with that poor tension and the sticky yarn, every time I went to pick, my shed wouldn't separate nicely. And so I'd have to really get my hands or a knitting needle or something in there and help separate all of those threads, warps, and it was just slow and frustrating. So as a resourceful knitter, I did reach out to my community knitter. I'm a knitter at heart, so every time I talk about weaving or crochet or anything spinning, the word knit ends up out of my mouth in a way it shouldn't. But as a resourceful weaver, fiber artist, I reached out to my community. I did get some really good feedback about tips for working with these really sticky kind of fluffy yarns. And I think the best tip I got was to buy some hair detangler, like, the No More Tears, whatever brand. This actually I think is a little bit fancier, but it was what was available to me, and a wide tooth comb, and to do your weaving while the fibers are still wet for being spritzed with detangler. And that actually helped a whole lot. The final straw really came when I decided that everything was warped too unevenly, and that I would, take it off and then rewind it. And yeah, I had to call it. So that project is off the loom. All I have left is this little sampler, which isn't terrible. Little uneven, really ugly edges. But it will be something I'll visit in future days. I didn't waste the warp. I cut it and chained it up, so it's available for me to revisit when I'm ready to, or I can use some of that yarn for other projects. So that's what's going on. But there will be some more weaving in future days, hopefully. So I'm excited to share that with you. So now what am I going to do? I have, a project off the needles and a project off the loom. So it's time to start thinking about future plans. I have been doing more secret knitting. We'll call this secret knitting number 2, so that hopefully I'll come back to this in future days. But that is living in this bag, and I can show you the yarn. So this yarn is an amazing electric yellow color. It is an alpaca silk merino blend that has just been absolutely lovely to work with. And if you guys have never used one of these little, I think they're calling them yarn bikinis. This is called Bink Waffle, or maybe made by Bink Waffle. This was a gift from the Grocery Girls for winning one of their sock knitting knit-alongs. But if you've never used one of these guys are game changers, man. I have always been, okay, if you have a ball winder and you wind a ball of yarn, most people fall in one or two camps. The knit from the outside of the ball of the yarn, or knit from the inside of the ball of yarn. And I have always been an outside of the ball of yarn person, because what happens is the end, if you knit from the middle, the end that's on the outside slowly unwraps and then gets tangled around and then makes a huge mess in your bag. And this fixes that, and now I feel like a dodo for knitting 15, 20 years and never having figured that out. So that is future talk. What else is future talk? I'm proud to say that I have finally decided what to do with my stubborn stash. So those of you who are watchers, long-term watchers, you know that earlier this year I did the Stubborn Stash Knit Along, where I challenged people to get that ball of yarn that just wouldn't leave their stash and make it a thing. And as you know, I failed terribly at that. I knit, I think, 3 projects and frogged them and just decided that it wasn't for me and I had to move on. But I have been seeing this adorable picture floating around Reddit of this cute little kitten in a cabled sweater. And I'm hooked, I gotta make it. I'm not normally a proponent of putting cats into sweaters, mostly because I value my skin and I like it to stay intact and on my body and, you know, all my blood inside my veins where it belongs. But I do happen to have a cat now who is very forgiving and will let me get away with just about anything and really hates the cold. So here in Okinawa, finally the weather has cooled off. We've had a couple of weeks of nice crisp weather in the 50s and 60s. And my little kitten, my princess Cyrilla, she has buried herself under our covers and refuses to come out. We happen to have a nice sunny window that shines this bright beam of light onto one of our guest beds. And she just buries herself so far under the covers, under that guest bed, that you almost can't tell she's there. There's just this lump, you know, in the center of the bed. So I think she might forgive me if I go ahead and knit a blanket or a sweater for her. And I actually am going to use this book. I am getting some really good mileage out of this book. So this was the Sweater for Dog book that my mom sent me very kindly. I knit her 3 dog sweaters, and I thought, well, it'd be easy enough to just follow along. So this is the sweater I'm going to be making, which is a really cute cabled sweater. I have some complaints. So my complaint is that this is a cabled sweater and it's all written out pattern. There's no chart. And I know that people fall on one side or another of this too, right? They either like charts or they like written patterns, or they like both. But I respect that. I do. I respect that people have different likes and dislikes and different learning. But for me, it's like sacrilege not to chart out a cable pattern. And I think part of that is because I am a left-handed knitter, which means I knit from left to right across the row. And when I execute some techniques in knitting, I have to modify them as a left-handed knitter. The first thing that comes to mind right away are decreases. So lace 2, if you have a lace chart, that's what I want. I want to see it all charted. I don't want to see any written instructions, because I need to be able to visually look at it and understand that when you say knit 2 together, I actually have to do a slip slit and knit. So anyway, the short story here is that I have learned my lesson about trying to work from written patterns with cables. I've done this before, and what happens is that all of my cables end up crossing the wrong direction, and you just lose the pattern and it looks funny. Sometimes you get lucky and it's a pattern where it doesn't matter, and sometimes you get really weird blankets, like one that's sitting on my couch right now. But what am I going to do? I am going to just chart it. So I'm going to go through the book line by line and chart it out, and then I can easily make some modifications, because already this pattern's a little bit too big for my cat, and it will just make it easier for me to see and visualize what's going on. So if you don't do this normally, you can either do it with some graph paper and just handwrite out your annotations, or I like to go into Excel and do it there. In Excel, I do change the column widths to about 2.5, and I leave the row widths alone, and that gets a roughly knitted sized box around for you to chart with. So I am going to be working on that. I think by the time I get it done, it'll probably be nice and warm here, but it'll be available for next time the winter rolls around. And if we happen to move somewhere cold in the future, it'll be available for her. Plus, we already know that she loves yarn, so why not give her yarny gifts? I have a couple of other future projects kind of kicking around in my brain. One of the things I did while I was in my sling is that I took this class on Orenburg lace knitting, and I'll put below all the information on where you can find this class. If you're not familiar with Orenburg lace, I'm not gonna spew the whole class back to you because that defeats the purpose, and you can go take that class. But it is a particular style of knitting that originates from Orenburg, Russia, where there was a large cottage industry of knitters. So this village became, known for its industry of knitting Orenburg lace shawls. And what makes lace shawls from this region distinctive? That's something I always want to look at when I'm looking at a traditional type of knitting, are what are the aspects of that knitting that are traditional to that region, that identify it as from this region. And some of the aspects of Orenburg lace are that it's knit in garter stitch, which is unusual for me. I feel like when I think of lace, I think of a stockinette stitch field with the lace on it. But all of the Orenburg lace is knit in garter stitch, and something else that's unique is they don't fuss with mirror decreases, like left leaning, right leaning. They're all the right leaning, knit two together for most knitters, slip slip knit for me. And there were some unique aspects to the way the shawls are constructed as well, which involve grafting. And it's actually, I was really glad I took that class because that grafting technique that they showed, like the Russian grafting technique, was really different from something I've ever used before. And I remember watching it and thinking, well, that's genius. That's a really easy thing to do, rather than, getting out my tapestry needle and hand sewing everything as I tend to do. So I think there's going to be a project on the needles shortly. That class does come with a pattern and pattern support and instructions and all of those things, along with a history of Orenburg knitting and more information about it. So these shawls are typically knit with a goat fiber, and I've spent a little bit of time kind of peeking around my stash trying to decide if I had a fiber that was acceptable for that. It's actually pretty fortuitous that I frogged my weaving pattern, because now I have quite a bit of this stuff left over, and I'm contemplating using this for an Orenburg lace shawl. Maybe not this blue color, maybe the gray color, because I only have this much left of the blue, but I have 2 cones of the gray. This may be a little bit of a thick weight. I feel like I would like light fingering to lace weight for this type of project. So I have looked at some other things in my stash, and they were all a little bit too thick also. These 2 skeins are both alpaca. One of these is Salt River Mills alpaca in the color blue spruce. The other one is a mystery skein that I really can't remember. This one is definitely thicker than what I want to work with, though. I feel like this is a worsted weight, and this is probably a standard fingering to maybe sport weight. So when I'm thinking about picking out yarn for this project, because they traditionally use a goat down or a goat fiber, it changes what kind of yarns I'm thinking about when I'm going into my own stash to pick out for this project. Typically, when I think of goat fibers, I think of either mohair or cashmere. They're kind of like the 2 different splits of the goat fiber community. Cashmere is a very fine, very warm, very soft fiber. And there are other goat fibers that are similar that you can get. I am not thinking about wool. So the reason I'm not thinking about wool is because wool has a lot of bounce and memory, and it's not going to drape the same way as something that is more of a down fiber. So of course I would love to knit this shawl with like 100% cashmere. That would be great. But also a little bit expensive. So some other substitutes I'm thinking about are going to be alpaca, any of the camelids. So camel, yak, alpaca, bison, some muskox fiber. That would be lovely. Will get me a Kivu shawl. That would also be very expensive. So yeah, I'm actually thinking about probably like an alpaca silk blend for this project. And I think, even though normally I lean towards knitting with interesting colors, instead I'm going to be knitting with probably like a natural gray or something like that. Hey, no ma'am. I know, your favorite yarn. Give me here. Oh, this. is my little yarn thief. You are so much trouble. I know. So much trouble. Are you my little monster? Are you my little monster? Okay, so the last thing knitting related I want to talk about this week. In my last episode, I mentioned that... Girls, come on. So in my last episode, I mentioned that I was thinking about hacking a Knit Picks pattern to knit for myself. It was that hexagon cable blanket pattern. I'm still planning on doing that, but I did want to let you know if you are planning on knit this blanket, you can still find the pattern. So it's no longer available on the Knit Picks website, but I did find a book on Amazon, which is by Knit Picks, called the Wood Smoke Collection, and it's a whole collection, gorgeous, gorgeous patterns. In fact, I would not feel bad about purchasing this book because I know I would knit some of them. There's lots of cabled sweaters and hats and scarves and blankets, and I may yet buy that, but I have been playing around with remaking those stitch patterns, and like I said last time, I'm going to be going pretty cheap with this one with the Heartland Lion brand. This is a bulky weight 100% acrylic yarn that was a special request from my husband because he does not like wool, and snuggling up in an all wool blanket isn't his dream. I know, gosh, incompatible. Time for a divorce. No. So there will still be a blanket that's coming down the chute sooner or later, whether I decide to bite the bullet and purchase a book and wait for it to ship, or just go ahead and try to knit from my own memory. I did find a couple of really neat hacks for I-cord edgings, which was something I was struggling with as I was trying to recreate this pattern. Is the I-cord edging that was in the original pattern wasn't making much sense to me, probably because I don't actually have the pattern. So that is it. That is all I have to say for knitting this week. Let's move on to life in Okinawa. Alright, for life in Okinawa, I always have to start with the COVID update. I know everyone's probably sick of hearing about it. It's crazy to me that we are, more than a year out now, and still I'm giving, weekly and monthly updates on the COVID status. But here we are. My cats are, as always, trying to help me, so stand by. So Okinawa and Japan are both seeing some pretty big upswings in the numbers of coronavirus cases. Okinawa is currently the highest rated prefecture in Japan when it comes to cases per capita. I know we've had increases every single day this week, some of the highest numbers we've seen so far. So it's getting, a little more restricted, a little more less likely to go outside, and definitely not a ton of going outside and shooting videos for this channel. So hopefully you guys will forgive me. Japan has seen some huge upswings in numbers. I used to get briefings every week, and one week I saw a jump of 20,000 cases, which to some bigger countries in the world may not sound like that much, but Japan's a pretty small place compared to like the US or some of the other countries. So I did see in the news that Japan is starting to restrict travel, so if you're not a resident of Japan, they're not letting you come in right now. And hopefully, as these vaccines start to roll out, we'll see things. Here in Japan, I don't think the Japanese government has authorized a vaccine yet, but they are working on one, so hopefully that'll be hitting the local population soon. I have received the first shot of the vaccine series, but that's because I am a US member here, so I'm allowed to get the US emergency authorization vaccines. So I did receive my first shot a couple of weeks ago. I should be due the end of this week or maybe next week to get my second shot, so I'm excited to get that on board. My husband is not yet eligible to receive it, so of course I'm trying to continue to be cautious just because I am protected, he is not. And one of the things they don't know for sure about the vaccine is can a person who's been vaccinated still spread coronavirus? So how would that work? I would become in contact with someone and maybe pick up a viral load, but my body is ready to fight it off because I've had the vaccine. But what they don't know is, do I develop enough of a viral load to potentially spread it to the people around me? So if you are a person who is getting the vaccine and maybe your family members haven't received it yet, you are not free and clear to take off your mask and go to a party and start traveling. Not yet, okay? But it's coming down the pipeline. So I'll get off my Corona soapbox for a little while here. I am, of course, out of my sling, so we'll give you an update on the shoulder. I had a bicep tendinosis and like rotator cuff debridement a few weeks ago. I am starting strength training, starting weight bearing on this arm. It is not going quite as smoothly as I hoped it would. If you're not paying attention, you probably don't see anything wrong. But if you are around me a lot, you will notice that my range of motion is not where it should be. So unfortunately, this is a little bit of a cause of the coronavirus lockdown, is that I wasn't getting the frequency of physical therapy that I should have been getting as a post-op patient. And now that they have identified a problem, my team's been great. My surgical team has jumped in and helped me get into more frequent physical therapy or occupational therapy. So hopefully the shoulder will be better soon. I love my occupational therapist, but she does torture me and I have some pain, so all the noises. So that is where this shoulder is at. The knitting definitely I've picked up again, but I find that I have to take more frequent breaks. I can't hold my arms up and knit as much, so I'm trying to relax my arms into my lap while I knit, and even still I have to take some breaks here and there. So that explains a little bit of the decrease in knitting content you've probably seen over the last month or so. But there will be more to come. I am very excited to start casting on new projects as soon as possible. Alright guys, that's going to be all for me for today. Hopefully next week I'll have some progress on my Orenburg lace shawl to show you. I'm actually really excited to talk about traditional types of knitting and what is iconic of that style of knitting and the history of it, etc., etc. While I was in my sling and taking that Orenburg lace class, I was also kind of digging down the rabbit hole of traditional patterns from other parts of the world. And I'm excited. I think future episodes, maybe I will tackle one of those at a time, so we can talk a little bit about like the traditional sweaters of the Pacific Northwest versus like Norwegian sweaters versus Fair Isle sweaters. It's interesting. I'm picking sweaters because that's what I'm interested in, but you could easily do this with lace. So if you think about like the Shetland lace, and I'm not prepared to like list a whole bunch of laces right now, but there are definitely lace traditions from around the world. There are hat traditions from around the world, and there are sweater traditions. So I think what I'm going to do is the next couple of episodes, we're going to look at traditional sweater patterns from different regions of the world, because that's what I want to talk about and that's what I want to read about, and hopefully you guys will also be interested and can learn a little bit from this. If there is a particular style of knitting or traditional type of knitting that you're interested in, please pop it down below, because I would love to dig down that rabbit hole with you, and then maybe we can all learn something together. Thank you so much for staying with me today, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, and if you want to see future video or dig into some of my past content, I really would love it if you would hit the subscribe button. Both of these help me gain my status in the YouTube world, so like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.